doctor, that you believed an institutional should make it hard for people to live their lives so they'd feel pressured to get vaccinated. Could we run the audio clip on that, please?
You think can be done about it? I have to say that I don't see a big solution other than some sort of mandatory vaccination. I know federal officials don't like to use that term.
Once people feel empowered and protected legally, you are going to have schools, universities, and colleges are going to say, you want to come to this college, buddy? You're going to get vaccinated. Lady, you're going to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
Big corporations like Amazon and Facebook and all of those others are going to say, you want to work for us, you get vaccinated. And it's been proven that when you make it difficult for people in their lives, they lose their ideological bullshit and they get vaccinated.
Hi, everybody. It's me, Albatross. This is a very special episode. Very special episode. Once again, it is sponsored by frustration and anger, but it is inspired by determination and hope that the state will actually hold Dr. Anthony Fauci accountable for his crimes against humanity. Yeah. And I have to say, coming from the perspective of someone who loves science, who has an absolute passion for science, it's scientists like Fauci that give science in general a bad name. And I have no patience for it. I have no patience for someone claiming to be representative of the subject I love. Because he does not represent science. No, he represents the opposite. He represents regression, is what he represents. Absolute regression. Not progression. You see, this is the thing that they had all backwards the whole time. Fauci, Biden, Mayorkas, none of them were really true Democrats. Not the kind of Democrat that I grew up watching. The beautiful party that fought against injustice, that fought against the monopolization, that fought against all these horrible things. No, I'm sick of calling people like Biden and Fauci and all of them Democrats. They do not represent the Democratic Party. I don't even identify as a Republican or Democrat, but it seems lately that those terms and definitions, their definitions have changed in the last decade or so. So sometimes when I say Democrat or Republican, I'm not talking about the definition right now. But anywho, no, they don't represent democracy. They don't represent science. And I'm sick of pretending like they do. And Fauci, honestly, is worth his own miniseries. He is the stereotypical evil scientist. But I don't know about anybody else. But it was absolutely painful to watch those hearings and just watch one of the biggest government, you couldn't be as close to the federal government as Fauci was. Someone who they put there on a pedestal to represent all other scientists and doctors. It was super painful to watch that doctor completely avoid accountability of any kind, to gaslight and lie, and to essentially make a mockery of the country and the scientific subject that I love. Make a total mockery of it. And I know a lot of you all remember being held hostage from early 2020 to, when was it when we were finally let go? Like late 2020, early 2022? No, it was even longer. It was about, like, they had things shut down and messed up for years because of this guy. That whole shutdown that was supposed to last 2 weeks, that lasted 2 years. There's hours of footage of Congress, like, arguing with him. Like, when is all this going to end? Why are they asking him? When did he get total authority on things like that? Like, it was just awful what played out. Like, oof. I would go as far as to call it a global scale science experiment. That's what it seemed like to me. Like, you guys heard that footage earlier. Him literally saying, you make it difficult for people to live their lives. They'll put aside their ideological bullshit. That's what he said. Meaning, people will put aside their fight for their liberties because they don't want to lose their job. And it was a lot of people, too, who had to give in and get that vaccination because they had families to feed. And I guarantee... And to see those people get ridiculed and gaslit like it was no big deal. Well, I'm here to tell you, no, I never finished my science degree, but I want to tell you a story. When I was in college, right? And when I was going to college, this was before COVID, okay? This was actually a couple years before COVID. And this is why I feel the way I do. Because I distinctly remember the flu vaccination going from being optional every year to all of a sudden, out of the blue one year, you had to get it. At least if you were in any kind of like medical institution, like learning and or going to clinicals and things like that. Now, like there had always been some requirements for that. Anytime you work in situations like that, like, you had to get tested for TB. You'd have to get the vaccination for the hepatitis A or B. Like there's a couple of different vaccinations that have always been pretty standard to work in those kind of environments. Well, the flu vaccination was never one of them up until then. And it was wild. It was so wild. Okay, because the instructor was like, okay, because we were all about to go on like an excursion, not an excursion, but like it was an assignment where we were going to different clinics and doing vaccinations and things like that for free. Well, all of a sudden, before this event was going to take place, our teacher was like, okay, you all are going to pair up in groups of 2. You're going to and if you haven't had your flu vaccine yet for the season, you guys are going to give each other the flu vaccine. And then drops it on us, well, if you don't do it, or if you haven't had the flu vaccine and you don't get it, you cannot continue in the course. I was flabbergasted at the time. I was like, what? I was like, can they do that? Well, apparently they could, because my partner raised her hand and told her instructor, she said, I have adverse reactions to the flu vaccine. I can't get the flu vaccine. And our instructor gaslit her and said, oh, that's not possible to get a reaction to the flu vaccine. That's not possible. Oh, yeah. So pressured her into getting it. I was the one who had to give it to her, which made me complicit. I even asked her before I did it. I was like, are you sure you want to do this? I was like, fuck her. And she said, no, I can't afford to be kicked out of this class. Like, because they're expensive. You get kicked out of class, you got to pay for it again to take it. Plain and simple. Like, They were literally taking our rights from us, like, right before our eyes. And then gaslighting us. Well, and sure enough, my partner did have a bad reaction. She had to leave class and go to the hospital. Yeah. So needless to say, when all this COVID crap started happening, I was like, it almost felt like that was a test to see if we comply. And since most people did, when that flu vaccine mandate became a thing, like nurses, doctors, all kinds of medical professionals had to get the flu vaccine. And most of them did. Some of them lost their jobs, though. Some of them lost their license to even practice anymore behind that. Then here comes along COVID. And then the vaccine that came out at like record speed that wasn't even regulated by the FDA yet. No testing done on its long-term effects. And then they bullied the whole public into getting that vaccine. Not just the medical professionals. They bullied the whole American public. Like totally disregarded science. Made it political. Politicians were forcing people to get vaccinations, and people were refusing to see the craziness behind it. Well, you all remember what happened, so I'm not going to keep rehashing it. Let's just get into stuff that maybe we don't know about Mr. Fauci here. But something interesting. Dr. Fauci, I don't even like calling him doctor, but he should have his license taken away. He really should. I don't know if he has, but he should. Interesting about him though. Back in the late 70s is when he first started working at the NIH. And then by 1987, or late 80s, he was like he rose through the ranks at NIH, and he kind of became, at the time, I don't know if he was like the total head by then, but he was very much credited with coming up with like treatments for HIV and AIDS. And he even got an award by the Bush administration for his work. So, little thing to keep in mind about all that, despite his award and despite how much he may have helped the HIV and AIDS community, theoretically speaking, not a lot of people know that it was at the expense of foster kids. Not a lot of people know that. And I'd like to think that they don't do this as a practice, but I'm not so sure. Because in order to treat kids with a medication, it has to go through clinical trials involving children. Well, when it comes to foster children, if they're foster children, they're wards of the state. So it's like the state gives consent for this crap. And this was going on for like over a decade. Now, it's odd. They don't give any details on how this affected the kids, where the kids are now. None of that. But any kid out there, I guess they're not a kid anymore. Anybody out there that was a part of this or was treated as a guinea pig during their time in foster care, please reach out to me. I would really like to talk more about this. This is something I've just been made privy to. I didn't realize went on. And I think it's terrible. I don't like it. And I love science as much as I love science. Like, we gotta, like, we got to stop this notion that the US government has had for decades, that just because another country is doing atrocious, terrible things, that means that we've got to do it to keep up with them. It's like, basically, what? No, we got to be more evil than they are, so we make sure that their evil doesn't affect. You know what I mean? Like, but it's definitely something I'm going to do more research in, because I don't like this. I don't like this, that kids who don't have biological parents or guardians of any kind to advocate for them. I don't like this. Like, do they talk to the kids about it? And if they do, is there anyone there to help make the kids understand the risks? Like, what the hell? Like, what is all this? Why did he get an award for this? Does anybody know? And like, I couldn't find the research. Like, I couldn't find it. So, like, what the hell? I just want to know more about this, and it's just like their plan becomes so clear, because it's like, dude, like, it just like all falls into line when you start looking into the people who are actually running our country the last 4 years. Oh my God. I'm not talking about Joe Biden. I'm talking about his lackeys, his cabinet. It's like they literally wanted to kill us all, it seemed like. They literally picked people who have no respect for other people, no regard for life, no regard for vulnerable children, vulnerable animals. Anyway, let's move on from this. It really makes me mad. But yeah, yeah, no shit, Jim McDermott. He pointed out that foster children could easily be taken advantage of by the system. Why don't you just not do that? I don't know. But yeah, not long ago, a couple people in Congress got wind of the horrible things he was doing to some of the animals at the NIH, like beagles, baby pigs, like all kinds of stuff. And like, it's costly and unnecessary at that. Like, there's better ways these days to do these things. But Fauci didn't, like, you know, he's a freaking sadist. And he was like literally like cutting like beagles' throats out. And not only that, he was experimenting on people. He was injecting men with syphilis and stuff like that. And now we could go into, well, if they consented to it, all we want. But it's like, why? Like, this man is literally arguing about the necessity of gain-of-function research. And for those of you who don't know what gain-of-function is, it's basically like Resident Evil type science experiment. But basically, it's when you're taking viruses, right? Like dangerous viruses, and making them see if you can make them more dangerous. So yeah, it's like Resident Evil type of scientific research. They're trying to make like existing viruses more deadly. And their reasoning is they want to understand everything about this virus. And a lot of the arguments that they'll use to do this is that like countries like China do it. Just like they argued about the H-bomb. You know what I mean? It's like, well, they're doing it. You know, it's just wild. Will we ever evolve beyond this? Like, this toddler notion where, anywho, but yeah. It's really unnecessary research, and it's very dangerous research. Like, it is, one scientist once put, it is, anytime you're doing gain-of-function type research, you are gambling with civilization. You are gambling with it. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Now, there's lots of quote conspiracy theories surrounding where the origins of COVID, and if it was a natural virus or a man-made virus. And I don't know if we'll ever be able to prove one way or the other. There's lots of evidence to suggest that it's not a natural virus, being that it doesn't infect animals, like it doesn't have like a receptor for animals, so meaning animals don't get infected by it. And typically a lot of our viruses and illnesses come from animals. A lot, not all of them, a lot of them though, a lot of them. So it's like the circumstances around COVID are very extraordinary if it came from nature. So anywho, but we're gonna go ahead and assume that his super dangerous gain of function research that he was conducting, and he was also funding in China to conduct, we're going to just go ahead and assume that's not where COVID came from. We don't need to argue if it's dangerous or not. You know what I mean? We don't need to. But I don't know if anybody remembers, throughout the year, in the year 2020, it was like this big feud erupted in the mainstream media between Donald Trump and Fauci. And a lot of people, myself included, I was one of those people, was arguing, well, Trump's not a doctor, so until the first time I walked into a store and I was told I wasn't allowed to come in unless I had a mask. That was when I was like, wait a minute, what? That was when I started to see it a little differently. Because, unfortunately, like anyone who studies microbiology at all knows that it is an absolute certainty that new diseases are made every day, all the time. New diseases are made all the time. They don't always make it into the population, but it's a fact. New diseases are made every day, like by many different things, many different reasons, but which I'm not going to get into right now. That's not the point. This isn't a science video. But the fact, like even they literally wanted to shut down the whole world because of it. And unfortunately, things like disease and war have been a part of our reality for so long. And in my mind, at least, none of these new rules that happened at the time made any sense to me whatsoever. Like the mask thing, for example. It was like, okay, I could understand if they were making everyone wear like a real legitimate medical mask, but they weren't. It was like any bandana would have done. And that's not gonna do, if anything, that makes it worse. But just beyond that, the main rule that stuck out in my head as the most absurd and the most obvious violation of our rights, to the point where I realized that they were getting carried away with it and that this was a power trip, was when they started implementing that people couldn't go out at night, people had curfews, things like as if you could get a virus easier at night than you could during the day. Or you could get it by driving and go, like, you know what I mean? Like, it was all kinds of wild stuff happening that was historic. It was historic for the United States. It really was. We've never shut down nothing, our whole world, because of viruses. Never. Ever. Imagine what it was like when polio was on the loose and there was no vaccine for that. Can you imagine? And that was really bad. That had like a very high infectability rate. And not only that, it literally had horrible consequences. Like, there are some older people in our population that had polio when they were children and like are still affected by it into their old age. It was an awful virus. So, and then just in retrospect, knowing what we know now, how they manipulated the numbers, how they were like labeling deaths as COVID, even though they weren't, like knowing what we know now, and just listening to that hideous recording of Fauci trying to make normal Americans' lives miserable just so they would comply and get a vaccine. But why? Why? Was it to make money? Which it probably, because the NIH made a lot of money for those COVID vaccines. I mean, Dr. Fauci claims he didn't get none of it, of course, but someone did. Someone did. But anywho, I gotta go. This was part 1 of Fauci. I'm gonna have to come back and talk a little bit more about him in just a little while. Stay tuned.